Hi, friends. Happy holidays. Today we are re releasing episode 11, part 2 on Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love. It is a classic, doomed to fail relationship. It was never going to work, but they were happy for a little bit. And we talk about that in the show. And we talk a little bit about what happened to Kurt and how sad every preteen in America was for a while. If you have any ideas or questions or things you want to tell us, please reach out. We love it. We're at doomtofailpod at gmail.com and on all the socials at doomtofailpod. Please enjoy this episode and we'll talk
In the
to
matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
So, okay, well, I'll make the transition over to the ever-shifting premise of the show, which should be true crime, but in my case is actually not true crime. So,
well, great. There we
we'll
go.
mix it up. We'll mix it up this week.
Oh, no.
So,
episode 11, new show.
exactly. So, well, I started out researching. I was going to do Michael Alec. Do you know who that is?
No. I
Yeah,
won't look it up, so you can do it later. Or tell me.
Yeah, no, I'll just tell you. I don't think I'm going to do it now, but I started doing that because, so Michael Alec is part of the club kid scene that was part of this New York club. You recognize this, I take it from your
Is
face.
the Macaulay Culkin in the Monster
Party
movie?
Monster.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's Party Monster is the dramatized version of Michael Alec. The only really famous one that people would recognize now is RuPaul was part of them. And Michael Alec ended up killing somebody and going to jail for a long time. He got released and he died actually recently. But
Really?
whatever.
I have been to Limelight, that club.
What's it like?
It was cool. I mean, I think it's closed. I mean, I think it closed a long time ago, but it's in an old church, which is cool. You know.
Yeah, I think our former employer threw a party there actually for a book release.
Maybe.
Yeah. So I started watching Party Monster this week because I was like, I'm gonna do Michael Alec, and so I should probably reference the movie. And in the movie, Marilyn Manson's in it, and he basically plays Courtney Love is the only way I can describe it. Just like this, like totally insane, druggy, junkie, whatever. And I was like, you know what? I got a better idea for this week. So again, the story this week is not going to be true crime in nature, but it's going to definitely hit on the red flaggy parts of the show's premise.
Mm-hmm.
So I've already given enough to indicate what I'm going to be talking about, but I'm still going to pretend like I haven't and just read the outline.
Perfect. I'm ready.
So I'll start by saying that this is a rock and roll story, obviously, and because it's a rock and roll story, there's going to be a lot of legacy building, and so because of that, people are going to have a ton of feelings and passion about like what I'm going to be discussing here today. But because there's a lot of legacy building, there's a lot of conflicting stories out there in terms of when things happened, who was there when it happened. Everybody wants to be a part of the story, which is, I think, a common human phenomenon when certain famous people pass. Outside of like pure facts, there's a bit of speculation here. And by pure facts, I mean location, manner, time of death, things like that. Things that can be like scientifically proven by objective third parties. Outside of that, it's like a lot of just junkies telling stories to each other, basically.
You're a rock and roll guy, so I feel like you're the guy to tell this story.
Am I a rock and roll guy?
No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you. So obviously today we're talking grunge, which means we're talking Nirvana and Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love, which is like one of the most probably red flaggy relationships that's ever existed in human history. When Nirvana was at its peak and Kurt ultimately died, I was not of an age where I cared about these things. Like, I think he died when I was around 9 years old. So I don't know. I was doing what 9-year-olds do. I don't know exactly what that would be. Probably like, caring about dinosaurs, Power Rangers, things like that. Not hardcore grunge rock. My brother was, though. My brother would have been 14. So I remember going to whatever store, probably Virgin stores, and like him buying the Nevermind album CD.
In like the tall CD boxes.
Yeah.
I remember my mom asking the guy at the store, like, what's Nirvana? And he was like, it's something that happens when you get like your tooth pulled or something. He just like said something weird to her.
Was he trying to be funny?
I think so.
Oh, I guess they gas you. So yeah, so at that time I'd never really I didn't understand the ramification of this. I was just not of that age group. but it's weird. I got so much more exposure to it, and you accidentally got some exposure to it as well. So Kurt was raised in Aberdeen, which
Oh, yes.
I've been through there because my ex's father's family was from Hoquiam, and so we'd go there and visit quite a bit. And because you came to my wedding, you've also been through Aberdeen, Taylor.
I think I have. And I remember being there and being like, this place is so fucking depressing. I can absolutely see why you would create grunge music here.
Yeah, like that's yeah. I actually put down here. I'm like, I doubt any of your stroll through Aberdeen was actually memorable, but it sounds like it was because it is exactly what you described it
Because
as.
I knew where I was, you know. I think I was like, ugh. You know, it was like trailer parks and I don't know.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
wet, rained. It rains there.
yeah. It's a so it's on a bay. It had to be because it was actually a logging town. So ships would come in, collect the timber, and then put them on boats and go wherever they're going. So it's no coincidence that in the late 80s and early 90s, exactly when Kurt's coming up, logging had become a much less viable industry in the area simply because they tapped that resource completely. There was nothing left to mine for there, essentially. So the town
Hmm.
geographically is lovely because it is on this bay. It is the Pacific Northwest. It's lush. It's green. Look, Olympic National Forest is like maybe 20 minutes from here. I mean,
Hmm.
you know, and that is one of the most beautiful, tranquil places that exists in the United States. And Aberdeen's like right outside of that.
Hmm.
But given the fact that they tapped this mining resource completely, this timber resource completely, the area is just economically depressed. Like to your point, it's just
Hmm.
like a blown out town. Like it just,
Hmm.
you know, when I would be there, I didn't want to like talk badly about it, obviously,
Yeah.
because of like family connections. But I was, yeah, I was like, everybody here has to be doing meth. Like you look at that town and you're like, of course everybody here is on drugs. Like what else is there
Yes.
to do? There's nothing else here.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's where Kurt was raised. So one thing that I actually found really really lovely about Aberdeen, despite everything I literally just said about it, is that one of my favorite Nirvana songs, like everybody's favorite Nirvana songs, is "Come as You Are," and
Hmm.
there's a welcome sign when you get into Aberdeen that says "Welcome to Aberdeen, come as you are," which I
Oh,
thought
that's
was really
sweet.
really lovely.
That is very sweet.
So going back to the main character, Kurt was born in 1967, and I would describe his childhood as accurately reflected in his music. Not that he wrote about his childhood at all, but when I think about Nirvana, I think of teenage angst, really. Like it's just
Hmm.
angsty music. That was what it sounds like his childhood was. His parents were divorced. He was a mad kid. He was aimless. The parents remarried. The step parents sucked. There's domestic violence and there's
Hmm.
substance abuse. It sounds like the divorce was a huge triggering factor for him. Like he talks
Hmm.
about it over and over and over again in later in his life. Like he thought he had this idyllic family, or he would have this idyllic family, and that divorce really seemed to have been like the thing that put him in this the mind space of just being like an angsty teenager
Hmm.
essentially. So all the factors basically existed that would produce a guy like Kurt would eventually become. Some of the
Hmm.
stories I read about him seem like just great indicators of his eventual personality. His parents would sign him up for Little League, and he would intentionally strike out so he just wouldn't have to play. He was apparently like a pretty good wrestler, and
Hmm.
he hated it. He hated being good at wrestling. He just wanted to like rebel against
Yeah,
everything. And
totally.
when he was in high school, he befriended like the gay kid in school because when everyone thought he was gay, they would leave him alone because they didn't want to. I mean, you remember what that was like back when we were in
Yeah.
school. Like that was a whole thing. He would spray paint "God is gay" on cars. Like he was just, yeah, he was just like very anti-establishment.
Hmm.
I found this picture of him when he was 14. He was in some school band, and the other kids around him, he's like sitting on these risers, and these other kids are so happy and they're having fun, and they're just like the kids are
Hmm.
having a good time. He looks like he wants to strangle the drum that is in front of him. Like he hates it so much because it's just anything that has to do with normalcy
Yeah.
repelled him. It seemed like, at least.
Yeah.
So he'd eventually drop out of school and lived this like vagabond lifestyle, just sleeping on friends' couches. He started doing his own myth building, saying he like slept under this bridge. That everybody said you couldn't sleep under that bridge because the water would just keep coming in; it would just wash you away. He was
Hmm.
occasionally homeless. He would, yeah, he would meet girls and just shack up with them for a while. And it sounds like he mostly just carried on these relationships for the sake of just having a place to stay.
Mhm.
And then these women telling him to like get a job, and he just would refuse to do so. He forms one band early on called Fecal Matter, which was very short lived.
Mhm.
And then he went on to form Nirvana in 1987. One of the things I learned here had to do with Dave Grohl, who I didn't know this, but he was not the original drummer of Nirvana.
He wasn't? Who was?
So
What
it's
was
this guy named
either?
Chad Channing.
Mhm.
So their first album ever released, so the big one was Nevermind, but the first album was called Bleach, and that was recorded with a
Mhm.
drummer named Chad Channing.
Mhm.
And I really hate what happened to this guy because yeah, band people move around and people get fired all the time, but he was so briefly tied to one of the most influential bands in the world, and at that time he wouldn't obviously know that. And
Mhm.
now really nobody knows who he is. Like you literally just asked me, like, who is he? Everybody knows Dave Grohl, but nobody knows Chad.
Mhm.
One thing
There wasn't there like a Beatle too, like a guy who was in the Beatles got that left before they became famous.
I don't know
I feel like
that.
that always happens. There's definitely
Yeah.
a guy who was supposed to be in BTS and then like got kicked out at the very end, and he's just like now he's just like a regular guy, and he's like, I miss my friends. But like
Would
they're
you?
superstars.
Yeah, like it's got a. Well, I mean, I don't know BTS's history. Maybe he knew it was gonna be really big at that time, but like in this case, like nobody knew Nirvana was gonna be
Yeah.
what it is. It's like you missed out. You missed that show.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, in 2013, Nirvana. That was the year Nirvana got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This guy Chad thought he would be in that group, but apparently they only included Kurt, the guitarist, this guy named Chris, and Dave Grohl. And like, listen, I actually like I'm gonna go into a little bit of a rant about Dave Grohl here. I love him so much, and he's even cooler than I thought. He made a point to shout out Dave in 2013 for his contribution to Nirvana and to Bleach. He like referenced how he wrote some of the later riffs that they used, and he really wanted to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that people knew that this guy was part of the band, even though he wasn't called out in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So,
Mm-hmm.
my side note about Dave Grohl. So, obviously, he went on to found Foo Fighters, which became a phenomenally successful band in its own right. He apparently is also a pitmaster these days and regularly feeds the homeless of LA with his barbecue. Which
I
is,
saw a picture of him doing that recently.
yeah,
Yes.
he did that recently, but he does it regularly apparently.
Ugh,
I also
gross.
watched an interview he did with Howard Stern, and I wanted to reach through my monitor and punch Howard Stern for just how
Always.
shitty he is to Dave Grohl. Like Dave Grohl handled this with such class, but at one point, because to us, Kurt Cobain is just like this. What like, who like, he killed himself. Like it is what it is, right? Like we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
I have no emotional attachment to the guy, but Dave Grohl was like his childhood friend and like bandmate, and
Yeah.
like they traveled the world together, and like they were very very closely tied. And Howard Stern would just say stuff about Kurt's death in just like flippant manner to Dave Grohl that was just really really off-putting. Like
Gross.
he was like, oh, so wasn't it kind of great that he killed himself because they gave you this opportunity to move on and do Foo Fighters? It was just like, and
No, he's my friend.
yeah, like
Ew.
Dave just was like, no, that's not a good thing. Like he just handled it very in a classy way, which was really cool to see. So, anyways, side rant about Dave Grohl. So in 1991, that was like I said before, that was kind of their breakout year. That was the year that they released Nevermind. And I didn't know this, but apparently Nirvana pushing Seattle grunge is partially the reason why bands like Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains rose in popularity as well. Like they invented this genre, and then everybody's like
Mm-hmm.
addicted to it now.
Mm-hmm.
So Kurt, by extension, basically becomes the ambassador of this genre that also happens to be the most popular genre of music at the time.
It sounds like he would hate that.
Okay, exactly. So I put this down. Think about this in modern terms. I don't actually know who this guy is now. I wrote down maybe it's Drake, maybe it's Justin Bieber, maybe it's Beyonce. I don't really know. Like, who is it? Do you know?
I mean, I don't know. I can't think of anyone who like started a new genre of music. I mean, I don't know I'm talking about music, but like I feel like there's people who are really popular, but like all the people you just named, they're pop stars. You know? Like I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I don't know anything new, but I'm also not like in the know, but grunge was like new.
So this is even bigger than that. Then, so it's even bigger than like a Drake
Yeah.
because it's all new. So imagine
Cool.
that. So imagine a guy like Kurt who wants to rebel against everything establishment, and
Hmm.
now he is this figurehead in
People are like,
corporate
we love
America.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna actually get into this like a lot when I get to like the suicide note, but like he does not handle this well in his own mind.
Hmm.
I will say that if Kurt didn't have this self-destruct component to him, he actually would have been the exact right guy for this. I watched an interview with him, and his lack of caring about anything is so quintessentially rock star-ish.
Hmm.
You should watch like I mean, even like the way you watch like rock stars now, and like I think
Hmm.
like I don't really know rock stars, whatever. Like is Bono a rock star?
Sure. I mean, he's like really old, but yes.
Sure. Like, but even like younger Bono, like you look at like how he presents himself, you look at how Kurt presents himself, doesn't give a fuck. Like he's wearing
Yeah.
like shoes that the soles are falling off of, his jeans are just shredded and tattered. Like not because he's trying to look cool, he literally just does not care. His bandmates had reported this is like a self-reflection on how little he cares. His bandmates had reported that the melody mattered way more to Kurt than the lyrics. So he'd
Hmm.
always come up with the melody and then attach lyrics to it. So it's funny because people would dissect every word he said. And
Totally.
in one interview, someone asked if it's hard coming up with ideas, and he goes, "This is a quote." He goes, "At one point, I was just using poetry and just like garbage that would spew out of me. And a lot of times when I write lyrics, it's in the last minute because I'm really lazy." And then I find myself having to come up with an explanation for it. Like he just didn't care. Like he was just like, okay, I guess
Really.
this fits that lyric or that melody.
But I think like I feel like your original question was like how his personality, a different personality, like would have like enjoyed the fame, but then I feel like then the music would have been different. Like he
Yeah,
couldn't
yeah,
have
yeah.
been a
You
different
can't have
person,
one. Yeah, you can't have one
you
without the
know?
other. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. So Kurt was quoted as saying, "When you're in the public eye, okay, he's a little bit melodramatic.
He's a little bit melodramatic. I think we could agree on that.
We can agree on that." So
Yeah.
this is a quote: "When you're in the public eye, you have no choice but to get raped over and over again. They'll
Mm.
take every ounce of blood out of you until you're exhausted. I'm looking forward to the future. It will only be another year, and then everyone will have forgotten about it." He's talking about Nevermind at this point.
Mm. Hmm.
How wrong was that timeline?
No, I know. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I actually now have two versions of Smell Like Teen Spirit on my Spotify playlist. It's the original, and then I have this other one that like it's a revamped like alt rock version of it. It's just it sounds fantastic.
I've definitely
Um,
gone through phases where I just like listened to Nevermind over and over again.
yeah,
Like the whole album. Yeah.
yeah, of course. I actually went down a pretty deep music rabbit hole researching this, especially because we know a lot about the bands that influenced Kurt in particular. So like the Melvins, if you've never heard of them, like that's basically where like the guitar influence kind of comes from.
Hmm.
The Pixies is where that kind of disjointed lyrics that you hear in
Hmm.
Nirvana songs come from. Sex Pistols, that's a lot of that anti-establishment stuff that like
Hmm.
he was a musical connoisseur. Like his music taste was fantastic. I actually like
Hmm.
started I'll send you a list of these bands that I listened to as I was going
Yeah.
through researching this. It goes without saying the melodrama piece of it. He just never thought that anybody was actually hardcore enough. He actually resented his fans in some ways. Like he thought that if you liked Nirvana for the music, then you had to also like it for the social and political message, which is just very anti-establishment, anti-fitting in. And
Hmm.
he's watching kids wearing polos and attending church, listening to Nirvana, and that just like I think that's a big part of why he basically turned into what he turned into. All this kind of gets us to who he is, his general state of mind, and why things are going to eventually derail. So, on the one
Hmm.
hand, you have Kurt, who has become basically music royalty, who at his core is basically just this lost kid with a ton of animosity towards being popular. And on the other hand, you have the other main character of our story, which is Courtney Love.
Hmm.
Okay, this is the doomed to fail piece of this. So Courtney has always been portrayed as kind of an afterthought to the story of Kurt and Courtney, except to the extent that she's demonized and villainized in it.
Hmm.
Like everybody thinks that Courtney's essentially like this hanger on, and I'm kind of going to do a bit of like revisionism on her history as well, mostly because Kurt is the main character of the story. And if I went into Courtney's life and the details of what she did, this would just drag on for like 12 hours because she's done a lot. She's done a ton of stuff. She's not just
Hmm.
Kurt's wife. She had her own trauma growing up. She had her own impactful musical career and all the stuff that she did with that. By some accounts, she was more famous than Kurt when they initially met.
Yeah, Hole is really good for
Hole's
her band.
great. I
It's
listen to
great.
Hole too. Add that to your
Yeah,
playlist.
yeah. Did you have you ever seen 200 Cigarettes?
No,
It's like a very 90s movie about a New Year's Eve party, and she's in it, and she's great.
she's great. Like and,
Yeah.
the Hustler movie she was in, I don't remember the name of it, but that she was great in that too. Like she's great in a lot of stuff she does.
hmm
So yeah, there's some debate on when they met. Some say it was before Nevermind's release. Some say it was after Nevermind's release. But like if it was before, then Courtney was definitely more famous than Kurt was because
hmm
Bleach wasn't a big album by all
hmm
accounts. Yeah, and I wrote here, yeah, her music's fantastic, and there's a lot of stuff that I learned about like Courtney that I didn't know. So if you remember like my apartment back in L.A. in Hollywood, which was like I guess it was relatively close to where you guys lived back then, but I was right down
hmm
the street from Jumbo's Clown Room, and so she used to work
hmm
at Jumbo's Clown Room. Like that was one of her first things that she did while she was trying to get Hole up and running. It's very cool. So however they met, they got married in 1992. They got married in Hawaii, and like I actually at this point don't even know if Kurt was stoned out of his mind or if he was actually genuinely happy. He looked really happy in the pictures though.
I feel like I can picture those. Let me find them.
Yeah. It was weirdly like a like a cute wedding for two incredibly grungy people.
Oh, he does look very happy.
Yeah. So it's worth noting that Kurt was in chronic pain for most of his life due to some stomach issues he had. There's some again, like there's no facts here. Like there's some conflict about he tells people he's in chronic pain to justify his heroin use, or was he in chronic pain and that's why he started using heroin? Like we don't know. It's up in the
Wait,
air.
did you hear like the stuff that like it was because he played his guitar with the wrong hand?
No.
So I feel like, okay, this might be totally wrong, but I feel like I saw something that the way that he held his guitar was like not the natural way that someone should hold their guitar, and especially with like his like dexterity, like he should have done it with the other hand. But because of that, he was like putting weird pressure on his stomach, and that was like part of the problem he was having.
Oh well, that could be a component of this for sure. Yeah. So we don't know. We don't know if one came before the other, but we do know, obviously, that Kurt dabbled in a lot of drugs and alcohol. He was not a stickler about the drugs that he used. He basically used everything. Like whatever was there and available at the time, he would use. Like I'm
hmm
gonna get into a lot of his ODs, and like some of his
A lot
ODs,
of his ODs, Jesus.
yeah. So some of his ODs didn't even involve heroin. He would just find whatever he could find, just take it. He's numb, like totally
hmm
wanted to numb himself out. He would start using heroin in particular off and on starting in 1986, which I think is the year he formed Nirvana, if I remember what I said correctly earlier.
hmm
So of all the drugs out there, it seemed like heroin is the last one you'd want to like be using and still be functional on. I've obviously never done it, but I read up a ton on what just opiates in general do, and it seems like it mostly just numbs you to everything. Some symptoms of opiate intoxication are nodding off suddenly. It slows down your
hmm
breathing. There's itching, tremor, slurred speech, impaired coordination, clouded thinking, disorientation, impaired memory. Basically, all the things that are counterproductive to maintaining
hmm
a career in a family life. I mean, look, obviously, I feel like it just goes without saying. I'm just harping on this a little bit too much, but Kurt was like an incredibly reckless user because I literally just stated I'm going to get into his ODs and I used plural in that. Uh, It almost felt like he knew that his story arc would be more romantic if he died tragically, which is like
Yeah.
contributed to his heroin usage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, like this is the part where I stand up for Courtney Love, which I don't know how many people have said that before in history. Courtney really tried to keep him somewhat on the straight and narrow, which like
hmm
she's a tragic character in her own right. Like she would also be doing heroin with him and also be doing all kinds of
hmm
different drugs. And there's like a whole history of her. She got Frances Bean got taken away from them because she said
hmm
in a Vanity Fair article that she did heroin when she was pregnant with. Like she's not like
Yeah.
a terribly sympathetic character, but in the context of these two, she actually did try. So
hmm
she was kind of, by the time Nevermind came out and he blew up and became who he became, she almost became like his manager. And whenever he'd have to go places and she wasn't with him, she would always tell drivers that they were not allowed to detour anywhere because oftentimes he would detour and go to a drug dealer and go buy heroin.
Yeah.
I think part of the public perception of her was kind of rooted in this thing where Kurt is like this free spirited dude, just woo woo, whatever. And
hmm
she's like a taskmaster, but she's not really like, all she's trying to do is make sure her husband doesn't just like die on the
Yeah.
road.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, the stories I was reading was like he actually really did love her. Like when he would disappoint her, he would just turn to this like sheepish child. And when people saw that, they were
Mhm.
like, "Oh, she's being mean to Kurt." And it's like, no, he's just like feels bad that he disappointed his wife in that moment.
Mhm. Mhm.
I read one story in the New Yorker, which was an article by Michael Azarad called "My Time with Kurt Cobain," and Michael actually wrote a biography with Kurt and became pretty close to him throughout his life, to the point where Kurt would ask him to attend business meetings with him just so he wasn't surrounded by business people alone. And at
Mhm.
one of these meetings, he talks about how Kurt got up to go to the bathroom. He thought Kurt had probably just left because he just took so long to come back. And Kurt came back and was obviously just high as shit on heroin. And everybody just
Mhm.
kind of ignored it because he's with these business people and like, who cares? Like, he's a genius. Let him do his genius thing, which is like, let him get fucked up as much as he wants. We're going to make money off him anyways. Apparently, Michael walks him back to the hotel that he's staying at with Courtney. And again, like, Courtney's just like disappointed in him. And that
Mhm.
night, he ODs.
Ugh. And they
So,
have a baby.
yeah,
You
at
said
this
Francis Bean.
point, yeah,
Yeah.
at this point, they have Francis Bean. So, like, again, think about this from Courtney's perspective. Like, you're raising a child, you're trying to manage this insane career that you have on your own, that your husband has, and also this guy just constantly out of his mind doing heroin.
Mhm.
So, in my
Mhm.
opinion, Courtney's the one who's like, she's the one who got fucked in this
Yeah.
situation more than Kurt
Mhm.
did. Kurt's drug use accelerates quite a bit. And at this point, so I counted 3 ODs at this point, where Courtney herself had to be the one to inject him with Narcan to bring him
Oh
back.
God.
Yeah. So
That's
there
awful.
was a tour stop, which is apparently the last one they did. This was in Munich. And Kurt gets actually sick from bronchitis and laryngitis. So he goes to Rome to pursue medical treatment, and Courtney meets up with him there. This is March 3rd that Courtney meets him in Rome for medical treatment. March 4th, he
Mhm.
ODs again.
Oh my God.
And this OD actually wasn't heroin. He from what I recall, I didn't write this down, but from what I recall, it was alcohol and Rohypnol that he ODs on at this
What?
time. Yeah, yeah.
Who?
I don't know
What?
why that
That's
is,
crazy.
but
Yeah.
I would assume as an addict, you just get whatever you can get, right?
Yeah. He's just trying to numb everything. I mean, yeah. You're right.
Yeah, I wrote down this just obviously keeps happening a lot. So later on, Courtney would, again, we don't know the facts. Later on, Courtney stated that this was a suicide attempt. We don't know.
Mhm.
Because earlier on, they said it's just an OD. Because part of this is also couching it as like, he's a genius. Like, geniuses do heroin. Like, this is
Right.
normal.
Totally.
So,
That's so dumb. Yeah.
so to them, they're like, it's better if we just say that he OD'd on heroin than that we say he took Rohypnol and alcohol to try and kill himself, basically.
Mhm. Yeah.
So after this incident, Courtney, the bandmates, friends, they all staged an intervention. This is on March 25th of 1994. Kurt loses his mind because he is the guy. Like, he's, who are you to tell me what to do? Like,
Mhm.
I'm Kurt Cobain. Eventually, he agrees to go to rehab. He went to a rehab clinic on March 30th. So 5 days after this intervention, he goes to the rehab clinic. He lasts 3 days before he scales the fence, takes a cab to LAX, and flies back to Seattle. At this point, nobody knows where Kurt is. So
Mhm.
Courtney ends up hiring a private investigator around April 3rd to try and find him again. He just disappears. Again, we publicly demonize her, but look at what this woman had to do. She
No,
hired a private
totally.
investigator.
To find
So
her husband who's like abandoning his family to do drugs.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So on April 8th, an electrician came to Kurt and Courtney's house to install a security system. And at that point, that is when they discover Kurt's body. He's the one who finds the body. He had
Mhm.
shot himself under the neck, under the chin, and he left a suicide note. He was also, not surprisingly, super high on heroin when they did the autopsy. There is some debate as to whether he would have died anyways because of the heroin.
Mm.
I learned so much about heroin researching this. So the reason it is debated is because we don't know if the amount of heroin in his system that they measured was called free morphine or whether it was
Mhm.
total morphine. Free morphine is what you inject at that time. Total
Mhm.
morphine is what is in your system always because you're a habitual user.
Oh.
Yeah, if the amount they found in his system was free morphine, then yeah, he would have OD'd. He would have died anyways. Whether he would have shot himself or not, he would have died.
Mhm.
If not, then probably not. The gunshots would have had to have taken him out. During the autopsy, it is assumed that he died on April 5th. So again, he flees the place, whatever, the recovery place on the 3rd, gets to Seattle. He sneaks up into this greenhouse that is a 2-story greenhouse, apparently, and he just kind of chills there doing drugs and whatever he's doing at that time. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
finds him. Like, apparently there's a bunch of people coming in and out of the house, but nobody finds him because I looked at pictures of the house. The greenhouse was separate from the main house.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all junkies, and nobody's
Yeah.
going to plant flowers this
I've seen
time.
that. I've seen that too. And like, yeah, like I think like didn't like the private investigator missed it too. Like he didn't even see the house, the
Yeah,
greenhouse. Yeah.
yeah. If you want, because I know you want to Zillow everything, Taylor. The house is
Ooh.
171 Lake Washington Boulevard in Seattle. This estimate is $7.8 million, which, given the fact that his guitar alone sold for $6 million, that's a bargain.
Yeah. Oh, it's nice. Oh, it has a nice view of like some water.
It's weird. I actually don't find the house creepy, even though somebody died in it.
It does have it's has this, well, the Zillow picture, it has like a smidge of like Amityville lights, that is fun. It's huge, 8,000 square feet.
Yeah, it's huge.
Holy
Yeah,
shit.
yeah.
There's only 4 bedrooms. I feel like there should be more bedrooms.
You don't find it creepy, do you?
Mm,
Like, when I think about the Tote family and like living in that house, that scares me. But living like the
yeah.
house Kurt Cobain killed himself in, that actually doesn't scare me.
No, not really. And wait, when did he die?
This one in '94,
So when in 94?
April. They think it's April 5th, which I
So
really
he
should
had
have waited 3 weeks to do this episode, and it would have been on his anniversary, and I totally botched it.
boo. Um, so he bought it I love Zillow. God bless Zillow. They bought it in January 1994 for $1.4 million.
Yeah,
And then she sold it in 1997 for 2.8, and then it sold in 2020 for 7.
yeah.
Cool. Continue.
Okay. Now your Zillow sleuthing is unrivaled.
Fucking love Zillow. I want to know everything. Ugh.
It's worth noting that there were other moments that were building up to this. Again, going back to Courtney's life being a living hell. So the gun Kurt used actually wasn't his own because his guns had been confiscated multiple times by the police because there were multiple reports of Courtney calling the cops saying Kurt has locked himself in a bathroom high as shit on heroin with a loaded gun and threatening to kill himself. So this is
Well, good on the
reported.
cops.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
show up and be like, okay, we're just gonna go ahead and take your guns away from you. But yeah, what a living hell. So on the conspiracy side of this, there's a ton of conspiracy surrounding Kurt's death. Most of them revolve around Courtney having killed Kurt, which these people are generally pretty awful.
Mm-hmm.
So the people who are saying this stuff for the most part are at best tangentially connected to Kurt and Courtney. They're basically just
Mm-hmm.
like these hangers on and losers. So this includes the private investigator who Courtney initially hired to find Kurt. He also
Yeah.
said Courtney must have killed him, which is like, what a loser. Like, you
I
want
feel
to
like there were
become
2
famous.
documentaries that came out at the same time about this
Yeah, there's a
a long time
ton.
ago.
There's
Yeah.
so many documentaries about this. I watched one of them last night, actually. Also, Courtney's father came out saying that Courtney probably killed Kurt. Like, how the fuck do you
What a
know?
dick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wrote this down because apparently during the Courtney's divorce proceeding, or during Courtney's parents' divorce proceeding, there were several people that came out and testified that her dad, the one who said that she killed Kurt, also used to dose her with LSD when she was a toddler.
Ew.
Yeah. Like, there was a ton of other allegations against him. No matter what, he had full custody revoked for ever like seeing her when she was a kid. So
Yeah, and I was trying to like be in the news. Like,
yeah, like I'm relevant. I'm important. I know Courtney Love.
yeah.
I'm her dad. I should probably talk about the suicide note for a bit. So it's kind of long. It's at least a full page in length, maybe a little bit longer than that. And it starts out really just talking about his career, about how he knows he should be enjoying this more than he really is. He references Freddie Mercury in it, and he says that he really paid attention to how much Freddie Mercury enjoyed like the adoration of crowds, and he was like, I wish I could be like him and like enjoy it the way he enjoys it.
Mm-hmm.
So he has the wherewithal to be really self-reflective in this moment, despite probably at this point being super, super high. And he totally understands the nature of what he's doing and what he's leaving behind by doing this. I'll read a little bit of the I mean, this sounds like it's going to be a lot, but this is actually a really small subset of the suicide
Mhm.
note itself. So this is I'm quoting this exactly.
Mhm.
There's good in all of us, and I think I simply love people too much, so much that it makes me feel too fucking sad. The sad little sensitive unappreciated Pisces. Jesus, man, why don't you just enjoy it? I don't know. I have a goddess of a wife who sweats ambition and empathy, and a daughter who reminds me too much of what I used to be, full of love and joy. And that terrifies me to the point where I can barely function. I can't stand the thought of Francis becoming the miserable, self destructive death rocker that I've become. I have it good, very good, and I'm grateful. But since the age of 7, I become hateful towards all humans in general, only because it seems so easy for people to get along that have empathy. Only because I love and feel sorry for people too much, I guess. Thank you all from the pit of my burning, nauseous stomach for your letters and concerns during the past years. I'm too much of an erratic, moody baby. I don't have the passion anymore, and so remember, it's better to burn out than to fade out. Peace, love, empathy. Kurt Cobain, Francis and Courtney. I'll be at your altar. Please keep Courtney. Sorry, please keep going, Courtney, for Francis, for her life, which will be so much happier without me. I love you. I love you.
I think he could have used some therapy and some other kinds of drugs.
Yeah,
Like he's depressed. He's antidepressants.
yeah.
And yeah.
I wonder like what would have happened if he like didn't do that, like who he'd be right now. Because I look
Mhm.
at like Dave Grohl, like they're so different. Like Dave Grohl and Chris Novacek, like they were not junkies at all. Like I mean, they
Yeah.
never did drugs. Like they did not go down that path. And you look at them now, and you're like, they're just like groovy 50-year-old people, like doing cool shit, feeding to the homeless. Like, I don't know what would have happened to Kurt, but um,
How did Taylor Hawkins die?
who's
He died of
Taylor
drugs?
Hawkins?
He did. So Taylor Hawkins was the drummer of the Foo Fighters. He just died. He died last year, about a year ago, and he died of a drug overdose. And
Really?
his he died in Colombia while they were on tour, I think. And it says that his toxicology, so that he had opioids, antidepressants, THC, like a bunch of drugs in his system.
Jeez, something about that lifestyle. Um, so yeah, I wrote down that line, better to burn out than to fade out. I really want to just, if I have the wherewithal, I'm gonna scream that from my deathbed. That is such a good line.
Perfect.
So legacy wise, look, like he basically died rock and roll royalty. He's now part of this 27 Club, which we all know what that is.
Hmm.
I mean, look, he's on that list with Joplin, Morrison, and Hendrix. Like that's the caliber
Weird.
of person that he became. And Amy
Hmm.
Winehouse died at 27 too. I forgot about that.
That's crazy.
Yeah, Courtney would go on. She'd create more music, more movies. She never remarried. There's some like she kind of seemed like she kept being like kind of a junkie in a lot of ways. But again, I'm not gonna fault her. She's going through a lot of shit and a lot of trauma. Francis inherited a huge chunk of Kurt's estate and now owns the rights to his name and images. Um,
Nice.
yeah, she is like she's loaded. Like Kurt's estate is like his likeness is worth so much money. I forgot what the exact number was,
Hmm.
but it was somewhere in like the $400 million range. Is like what that value of like just having access, having the licensing rights to that is what the estimates
Hmm.
are worth. She married a musician that everybody compared to Kurt in 2014. They divorced, and now she's basically just living her life, doing her thing. She looks exactly like Kurt and Courtney's child, like
It's amazing. She's
exactly.
so pretty. Yeah, no, she looks exactly like both of them.
Yeah,
But wait, I have a question. You don't
shoot.
think it's weird the way that the gun was and how he could have killed himself? Because I know that's part of the conspiracy is like he would have had to like it was like a rifle under his chin.
Yeah, yeah, he would have had to pull it with like his thumb or something like, or his foot. Like, yeah, I've heard those rumors too. My thing is, I'm just thinking about it like from a human nature perspective. He's like the biggest thing. He's like the biggest artist, biggest like celebrity in the world. Like, if somebody had done that, wouldn't we have figured that out? Like,
That's fair.
like if Courtney had actually, and also you read the suicide note, there's nothing suspicious about the suicide note. Like, I mean, people have
Hmm.
claimed that maybe that's not his handwriting, but it was, and
Yeah.
he definitely states that like I'm doing that. Like, it doesn't, it's not ambiguous as maybe not a suicide note. And also, he would
Hmm.
have probably died anyways because of the heroin overdose.
Yeah. I mean, he was probably with like whatever you said, like the morphine that was like in his body kind of like permanently. He was probably like rehab was probably physically fucking terrible because he probably was like doing a bunch of like withdrawals. draws and stuff,
I can't even believe he made 3 days. That's insane.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
So that's them. And like I said, I kind of framed this as Courtney was the one that kind of got the rough end of this because
Yeah.
Kurt's the bigger celebrity, and we all loved Kurt.
And then people are like mad at her when she was just like trying to keep her family together. And then also, yeah, aren't there like terrible pictures of her like holding Francis and crying outside their house and stuff
Yeah,
that like and like people like wouldn't leave her alone and all of that. So yeah, that's awful.
yeah. So that's
Rock stars, man.
yeah. Just God, like so much heroin. Like I just wall. Like I cut out so much of this story because I literally just would have said heroin 500 more times.
Yeah.
Um. So yeah, that's why we had coffee. So
Yeah, that's
a little
fair.
Seattle story. But yeah, that's my story. And now I'm gonna once I wrap this up, go look at tulips at Home Depot.
Nice. I'm gonna listen to some Nirvana. At the Airbnb I'm staying at, the fridge plays music. It's like has a whole screen on it. So I'm going to maybe
Fancy.
I'll put some Nirvana on it. It's been playing Pitbull. But I'll put Nirvana on.
Mr. Worldwide. Mr.
Hmm.
305. I watched so HBO, if you have HBO Max, they have a great documentary about Nirvana in general, but specifically Kurt and Courtney, called A Montage of Heck, which is like a
Ooh,
lot of just live footage of recordings of them just hanging out together. And I mean, it is grungy. It's very
yeah,
grungy.
yeah,
Some of it's hard to watch, but it gives you really good insight into like their lives. But anyways,
totally. What a
so yeah,
time.
what a time. What a time.
Crazy. Shout
Um,
out to everyone all those grunge girls who were all black for like a year afterwards.
seriously, to it's still
Bless their
hot.
hearts.
It's still hot. I don't like. I'm still drawn to that. But
No, yeah, oh yeah. Nothing's wrong with that. But they
yeah.
did it specifically because Kurt Cobain died and they were so sad.
I listened to this one podcast where this guy was talking about where they were talking about his death, and they're like, he was like, "Yeah, I wasn't into his music. I didn't really know." But then later, I became when I was like a late teenager, I got into his music, and for one day, I wore a black band around my like around my arm to because I was so like distraught over his death. He died like
Even though it
10
already
years.
happened.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
like, died like 10 years earlier, and everybody was like, "I don't understand. Did like a firefighter die, or like why are you wearing this black band?"
Like I just remembered.
Yeah,
That's fair. You can still like discover the music and be sad about it,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know? Yeah.
Do you want to call out? Do you want to be the one that calls out? Please rate and review us.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for sticking through this episode. I feel like I learned a lot about rock and roll relationships. Hopefully my tulip story makes sense in the context of whatever we're building here. But thank you, everyone. Please continue to rate us on Apple Podcasts. Thank you, everyone who's left a review. Even if you don't listen to podcasts, just please just subscribe on something. Everything's free. We also just went on YouTube. I am uploading our episodes